because we published, beloved. Oh my goodness. It's time for the final episode of season 1 of We Publish Beloved. In this episode, I'm actually going to feature myself. The last few episodes, the entire season, in fact, has centered conversations with Black and queer first time authors, authors who are navigating the publishing process and who are here to educate us. And what I'm here to do today is share my journey publishing my first book, Black Women Taught Us, An Intimate History of Black Feminism. So I'm going to ask myself all the questions that I've asked all of my guests before and provide real answers. So I'm Jenn Jackson. I'm the author of Black Women Taught Us, An Intimate History of Black Feminism, which was released by Penguin Random House in January 2024. It is 2 years post my initial release, and I am now here on a paperback book tour. So I have a lot to talk about. I want to first start with how it felt to write my book. I will say that I have a kind of unique journey to the writing process. I started off as an engineer in undergrad. I went to work at Disney as one of the only folks with an industrial engineering degree. I did that work for a number of years and then became a blogger. So many of us, late millennials, or should we say early millennials, in the 1980 to 1985 range, we are very similarly oriented to this work as many of the Gen Xers who were critical to the Tumblr era, the blogging era. And I'm no different. So I started a blog with my co-parent in, I believe, 2007. And that was when I started getting my writing practice in order. That blog led to, a lot of free publications. There's a lot of words I wrote that are lost to social media, are lost to, shuttering of platforms. But what was really great about that moment was I got my first bylines at Ebony Magazine. I got my first bylines at Washington Post, and eventually got a column at Teen Vogue. I started writing for Teen Vogue in around 2016 or 17. And, I was writing about white supremacy and everything I was learning in graduate school at the time as a political scientist. And when that took off, I started getting attention from editors and agents, which was just astounding to me because I had never really thought of myself as a writer per se. Yeah, I had never thought of myself as a writer, even though I was actively and consistently writing. What was really important about that moment for me was the validation of having agents and editors reach out to me and tell me, I love your column at Teen Vogue. I love what you're writing about. I would love to investigate or explore the possibility of writing a book with you. And so when my editor, Marie Pantajan, reached out to me, at the time she was at Live Right. And I was like, this is amazing. It's 2018. I had my first trip up to New York City. We went and got lunch, and she's like, what do you want to write about? And even though I had never considered myself to be an actual writer, I had all these ideas. I had so many ideas about what I could potentially write about. And we went with it. Like, she's like, get me a proposal, really think about how you want to show up in your first book. And I knew I wanted to write about Black women. I knew I wanted to write about myself. I thought maybe it was a memoir. We went back and forth on it being a memoir or a book of essays. I couldn't figure this out. It was actually confounding to me. And I had an agent at the time. I got an agent after that conversation. She was an incredible agent, a white woman at a very big agency who pushed me to write this book that would have been really centering the gaze of white women. The book was called An Inconvenient Black Girl, and I was supposed to be the inconvenient Black girl. The book was about all the ways that Blackness, Black womanhood inconveniences white supremacist and white racist folks. And after writing the proposal, I didn't feel good in my body. Like, somatically, I didn't feel good. I was like, I don't really like it. Uh, But I will say at the point I was in my healing journey and my writing journey, I trusted her. and I was willing to write whatever she thought I should write. And so I will say for folks who are watching and who are listening to this, that feeling in your gut, like, I don't think this is the book. I don't want to write this. You have to listen to it because as creatives, we have to move in our purpose. And that just simply wasn't my purpose. When I took the book proposal to my editor, Marie, she was like, "This is not what I want." She was like, I read your column, I listen to your podcast." She was like, "No, girl, go back and figure it out." And she asked me a simple question. She said, "What are you most passionate about?" I said, "Black feminism." She said, "What do you like teaching at school?" I said, "My Black feminist politics class." And I sat there and I told her about how passionate I was about my syllabus and how much I enjoyed teaching this course, but how it was so confusing to me because I had never taken a Black feminist politics course or a Black feminist theory course myself because it was never accessible. I went to these elite universities and there still wouldn't be anyone at those universities teaching this stuff. And she said, "Well, clearly there's a gap here. Maybe you should write a book about that." And that's how Black Women Taught Us came to be. It came to be because of my existing passions and my editor encouraging me and in some ways giving me permission to write the story that was already living in my body. The publishing process for me, I think, has been easier in some respects when I hear from other folks who are first time Black and queer writers. But I also will say it was a real struggle for me, in part because I had to start understanding myself as a writer. I had to start giving myself permission to tell true stories. I had to really sit with myself and work on my self-worth, right? To understand that what I had to say was valid, was important enough to be in a book, you know? So I did use an agent. She got me an incredible deal, a six-figure deal for my first book, and we slowly parted ways after that. I realized that she wasn't really helpful for me in the editing process. She wasn't very hands-on. She had a lot of other writers. She had a lot of other authors, and I didn't feel like I was getting the attention that I needed for this work, especially as a first-time writer. I remember telling her like, "Hey, I've never done this before." Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And she often wouldn't provide me the the scaffolding or the runway to be figuring things out. And I said, "You know what? This is not going to work." So even after that incredible deal she got me and the writing process going relatively smoothly at the beginning, I removed her and I got a new agent. So I will say that working with a traditional publisher has been this in this case, working with Penguin Random House has been a really great process for me. I am lucky in that I already knew my editor. I had developed a relationship with my editor before my agent. And so when I came to Penguin Random House, I already had the security and the certainty that this was an editor who wanted to work with me specifically. That is not normal. That is not the norm. Typically, you are agented and then you pitch your book, you shop your book around, and someone comes and says, "Yes, we want to help you with editing and publishing." I will say that my process has shielded me in a lot of respects from the volatility of publishing. I didn't have to worry about the book dying on submission. I didn't have to worry about whether or not my editor was going to champion it in those rooms, those boardrooms that I wouldn't be admitted to. I already knew she held me down. I already knew she was in support of the work. And so I will say for folks who are starting out, you want to have a really incredible relationship with your editor. You want to build that relationship because agents, frankly, will come and go, but the editor lives with your book for the duration of the time that you're writing it. So I wrote the book between 2020 and 2022. It was a very difficult time in my life. We were living through the early years and months of COVID-19. I had my children home from school. I was homeschooling my three kids and working as a first year assistant professor at Syracuse University in poli sci. It was hard, right? But what I'll say is that being home during that time gave me a lot of introspection and a lot of space for self reflection. And I do believe the book is better because I was not able to distract myself. I wasn't able to be out in the streets. I wasn't able to just, pick up my keys and my jacket and head out the door, right? We were living in a time where we were relegated to the household, which meant I had a lot of time to write. I will also say that it forced me to be honest with myself in some ways. It forced me to engage with the parts of writing this story about Black women that were uncomfortable. There were a lot of tears. I struggled to write chapters of the book. Writing about Fannie Lou Hamer was very, very hard, especially during a time where we were witnessing so many Black women passing away due to COVID-19 and other underlying conditions. It was very, very difficult to write about Bell Hooks. She passed away during that process. Toni Morrison also passed away in 2019. And so I was writing this book, and it felt really imperative. It felt like the political moment, the social moment required that book to archive and to take stock of our lived experiences and to tell true stories about what it was like to be raised by these Black women and to be nurtured by these Black women and also to be in the grief of losing so many of them. So I carried that energy into the book tour. So I finished the book in earnest in 2022 and then worked on getting the cover designed. Cover artist who goes by Careful Black Girl on Instagram. And the first cover was a little dicey. All the women on the cover were smiling. If you'll notice here, they are very serious. It's a very serious cover, and I wanted to make sure that all the women were on the book. So this is Barbara and Beverly Smith here, Zora Neale Hurston and Toni Morrison, who are on the back cover, and everyone else is on the front cover. And I was able to choose the colors. I said, I want them to be deeper reds and purples to represent the kind of regalness and the royalty and the reverence I have for these women. And they listened to everything I said. And it was one of those things where it was like, it was a practice for me in speaking it, right? Saying what I need and trusting that people would actually hear me. And they did. And it was new for me. I was working through my healing journey. It was something where I was like, there were times where I was afraid to speak up, but I'm just so grateful that I did speak up because I wanted to make sure that this book was precisely the book that these women deserved. Now, the book tour was a whole different thing, okay? The book tour whooped my ass, I will say. I was not prepared for the intensity of the book tour. And I don't know if there is a way to prepare for that. I don't know if there is a model for that. But the amount of travel I had to do from Syracuse all over the country and living somewhere where the airport is not very big, there's not a lot of flights in and out. You miss a flight and you're somewhere for another 6 hours to another day. Um, I will say, not being able to just drive to a local bookstore, it really made a difference. And so I also want to encourage authors who are in these more remote locations to think about what a book tour looks like and what you have capacity for. Living in the DMV now, right? I can just drive to at least a dozen bookstores, right? I can drive to Philly very easily. I can drive to North Carolina very easily. I can drive to Ohio, right? Living in somewhere as remote as Syracuse, which is closer to the border of Canada than it is to New York City, right? There were a lot of early mornings, a lot of, let me hop in an Uber at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and get to the airport because I'm going to have to fly and I'm going to have to take a connecting flight somewhere. And I was lucky in that my publisher covered the first leg of the tour, right? The first month of the tour. They took care of booking the flights, transportation, all of that. But after that, it was on me, you know? And so what I will say is like, this is one of the gifts of having a substantial advance is you can plan a pretty robust book tour. Please put some money away for taxes. Taxes will kick your ass. But also plan to foot your own bill for any additional months of book tour. I don't know how it works for other folks, but for me, it was 1 month. And I was like, that's just not sufficient. I wanted to make sure I got to the South. I wanted to get back to the West Coast. I wanted to get to the Midwest. And with a 1-month book tour, I really could only get to, New York, Philly, DC, you know? And so I planned the rest of my book tour. I cold called bookstores. I emailed them. I bumped it up. Hey, just want to bump this up in your email inbox. Like I was very much like, I'm going to do this work and I'm going to connect with you directly. And what I will say is that bookstore owners really appreciated the fact that the author was contacting them directly, especially being from a big five publisher. There are a lot of folks who do everything through their agent, they do everything through their publicist, and I didn't want to do that. I thought it was not interpersonal enough. I thought it would create a distance between me as the author and the bookstores. And for me, bookstores are everything, right? Like bookstores are everything. And so if we're talking about a Black bookstore, a woman owned bookstore, Latinx owned bookstore, queer owned bookstore, indie bookstore, it was important for me that they hear my voice and that I build that relationship. And what I will say is, I really do think that my efforts to build meaningful relationships with bookstores has has protected a lot of my readers and my book sales, but has also helped me along the way because bookstore owners know each other and they pass my name along to folks and they have asked to bring me back to be in conversation with other authors. Like I will say, like, and I didn't do it for those purposes, but I also think that that was so critical to the success of this first book. I could not have done this without indie bookstores. I didn't go to any big box retailers to promote my book. I did not go to any white centered bookstores to promote my book. Every single bookstore I went to was owned and operated by folks who look like, love like, live like me. And I wanted to treat that book tour as a very sacred space because it was. So two things. In creating that sacred space, I made those book events exactly what I wanted. I brought in a practitioner, like yoga practitioner or a somatics practitioner at each of those first stops to ground the space. We would do grounding exercises before the book talk. Some of this was for my own anxiety. I have debilitating anxiety, but through the book tour process have really learned how to not just manage, but also hold that anxiety in a way that is productive and that does not cause me to burn out or break down. All of that is because of community, the people who showed up for me. I will never forget, I had a book talk at Loyalty Books in DC, and one of the practitioners who came there for me saw, I was sweating, I was stressed out. And she walked over and she was like, "How are you feeling?" And I was like, "I don't know." And she gave me this stone to keep with me, and she meditated with me, and I went into that talk and I just felt so good. And so I also want to just hold space for the fact that we're all coming to this with disabilities in our bodies, with different expertise. And the book tour does not have to be one way. And for me, I wanted to have a book tour where I felt safe and where I felt comfortable in my body and in my skin. And that's what I made. I was hospitalized a month into my book tour. I was out with friends after a New York talk and had awful pain in my chest and ended up in the hospital for 5 days. We discovered blood clots, aneurysm in my aorta, fibroids that were out of control, and increasing gastrointestinal issues. And I had to cancel a book stop. It was it was illuminating because in some ways I think I needed that disruption to force me to sit with how I was treating my body. I think I needed that disruption to remind me that this book has always been about caring for Black women. And if I'm not caring for myself, then I'm not actually modeling what I wrote about? And that hospitalization really changed the arc of the rest of the tour because there was just some things I was unwilling to do after that. right? Like, I had to really get serious about taking care of myself. And I had to make rules about how many stops I would do in a month. Like, if I have to get on a plane, I'm only doing 2 of those a month. Everything else needs to be within driving distance, or asking if it's possible to do a virtual talk. And, I had to really get clear about that. I had to also get clear about what it looked like when I was at those stops. I did a talk at Politics and Prose, and they wanted me to stand up for an hour. And I was like, nah, friends, get me a chair. It was one of those things where I had to really sit and go, this is my body. And book be damned, right? I can't promote a book if I'm not here and alive and well to do that. So I will say that the paperback book tour has been so much better in terms of my somatic experience because of what I learned on that first book tour about not burning myself out, not overextending myself, not saying yes to things that I don't actually have the bandwidth for. I learned the power of my no, and I learned that we cannot let this publishing industry eat us up. I will say there were some surprises along the way. As a first time author, I did not know a lot about publishing, especially not traditional publishing. And I do think that this process has taught me about how competitive people can be. As someone who moves from a place of deep community and solidarity with other folk, I have learned that people will see your successes and your publishing journey as not always as a model or a possibility, but sometimes as direct competition. And it makes me really sad because I'm a fundamental believer and there's enough room for all of us. I just think that we can always bring one another along. But I've learned the hard way that even other black folk, even other queer folk, even other women, you know, will not necessarily support your goals if they see them in direct competition with their own. And that's been really hard. I'm grateful for the folks who have revealed that to me, right? So that I don't try to build with them anymore. But it has been so deeply disappointing along the way. But there's been some amazing surprises too, right? I have this incredible relationship now with Red Emma's bookstore in Baltimore. I've done 2 talks there, and I now have a book group that I bring there, every other month or so. I'm always in that bookstore, and it has been surprising to me how, like, I can call them and they say, "Jen Jackson," and how welcoming and beautiful and kind so many folks are in this literary space. I have just met some beautiful, incredible people and developed some incredibly meaningful relationships. And that was a surprise to me after the experiences I've had with folks who do not have that same type of orientation toward community. So I do want to just remind folks like it's definitely not all bad. It's just not. It's really not. Some of the most generous people I've met have been in this literary space. I also think one of my surprises along this journey has been how much more of a writer I feel like I am today. When you get to the bookstore and somebody's holding your book and it's the first time you're sitting there and you're talking to people and you realize they've read it and they've got flags in the book, and they're telling you on page 13, you said, there is something so affirming and validating about when the folks you wrote the thing for say, yes, this is for me, right? Like that has been one of the most beautiful experiences for me is people seeing themselves reflected and understanding this book is for me and my mother. I have a colleague at work, he's a white man. And when I tell you, he loves this book. He loves Black Women Taught Us. And he gave it to his wife. He gave it to his mother-in-law, and so, those experiences have been so, I don't know, it's beyond affirming, right? It's one of those things where it's like, I never knew where this book was going to go. And so I'm always so surprised and so heartened to see how far beyond me it's gone, And that's the beautiful thing about art is when you release it, it's really up to the world to figure out what to do with it. And that's just so incredible as a creator. There are things I wish I had known going into this process, right? Like, I would like to say I did a lot of research on the writing process, but I didn't know nothing. Okay. There were times where my editor would send me an email like, I need you to look over this thing. And I'm like, what is that thing? Right. I did not know. I didn't know how hard it was to record an audiobook. I did not know all the kind of nitty-gritty logistics behind writing a book, going on a tour, promoting a book, you know? I don't think it weakened the book or the process at all. It was an opportunity for me to ask questions and for me to learn. Like, this is the thing I want folks to do in this process is like be okay with not knowing so that you have a chance to learn, right? Feel challenged and then move from that site of challenge into a place of knowing, right? That's what it teach my students. That's important to me, right? Like I might not know. I don't need to know everything. But what I do know is how to be vulnerable enough to say, help, please help me, right? I needed a lot of help on this journey. And the old me would have really struggled to acknowledge that and to seek the help I needed. And this version of me did not have that problem. I was like, oh my God, Mayday, Mayday, nigga down, help me, right? So I will say, like, ask for help. Ask for help and ask people who are helpful, right? People who want to see you be successful. If there's one thing I could change about this process, honestly, I would change the way I treated myself because a week before the book came out, I had a major breakup with my girlfriend who I thought I was going to marry and, thought we were going to have this whole life together. And when we broke up, I said to myself, like, how am I going to do this without her? And I remember saying, I can't do this. I'm alone. And it was actually my mentee, Maya, who said to me, girl, you are not alone. And I was like, yeah, you're right. She was like, we're all standing right here. And it took me months, right, as I was healing from this breakup, but it took me months to sit with myself and to say, you can do this. Like, you don't actually need this person to do this. Like, you don't need this person to help you function and to help you get through this book tour. You have everything that you need in your own body. And there were tears. I'll never forget coming into Baltimore for my first Red Emma's talk, getting to my hotel room. The hotel room wasn't together. And the poor person from the front desk, she came up and she was like, oh, can I help you? And I just started crying. Okay. Like I just started crying because I was so overwhelmed and I was so overstimulated. And she's like, oh my God, let me help you. Like, let me help you. And it's beautiful moments like that remind me that a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the stress I endured, it wasn't necessarily self-induced, but I didn't have the tools yet to sit with myself and give myself permission to feel my feelings. And so if there was one thing I could change, it would be how I talked to myself in those early days and how I treated myself in those early days of the book tour. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I would change anything about this process. It has been such a rewarding and beautiful process. I am so incredibly proud of this book. I am in awe every time someone tells me that they've read it. I feel so full. And so I wouldn't take anything away or change it because I think it was all necessary for me to get to where I am today. But if there was something I did want to tell other first time Black authors, queer authors, disabled authors, I think what I would want to tell folks, a couple things. The first is just trust yourself. Just trust yourself, right? A lot of us are not raised to trust ourselves, to even hear ourselves. We're not even raised to hear ourselves. And I think it's so important that we listen to our bodies, listen to our work, listen to our craft, and then to trust it, right? That trust is a form of permission and it's a way that we signal to our nervous system that we're okay. I think the other thing I would tell first time Black authors, queer authors, disabled authors is that this work of publishing, this work of writing books is sacred work. It is like, I feel closer to my ancestors when I'm writing. It's spiritual work. And I want us to treat it as such. right? I want us to really understand that we are building a lineage and a genealogy that connects generations. You know, I was looking at Kennedy Ryan's publishing history yesterday, and she has written 64 books. One of her first like big books came out in 2015. And I was like, this woman has been writing for so long, you know? And if Kennedy Ryan didn't trust herself and give herself permission to engage in this sacred practice, we wouldn't have all this work, you know? And I look at folks like Imani Perry and Jasmine Ward, you know, who have been writing, And I feel like they get it. Like, I feel like they get the sacredness of this practice. And so I just want other folks who are out there for the first time to understand this is a thing that you just keep going, you know? You find your lane, you find your place, you find your voice, and you just keep doing it. You just keep doing it. And I mean, I can't say that at this point I feel like an expert or I even feel like I really know what I'm doing, right? But I do feel like I'm figuring it out, right? When I look back 2 years ago at the beginning of this book process to where I am now, when I look back at me in 2018, not even knowing what I wanted to write, when I look at where I've come from, I am just in awe. I'm in awe. And I just want more of us to understand that we already have that in there. We already have that expertise, that skill, that passion, that drive, that ambition. We just have to believe it. So, to all my listeners who have been on this journey since May 2025, who have been following along with the book process and who have been listening to this podcast, We Publish Beloved, I want to say thank you for being here for this first season. It has been incredibly meaningful for me. It's been an honor to speak with the folks I've spoken with. Season 2 is on the way, and we have some incredible authors coming in season 2. And usually this is where someone says to me, I'm proud of you. And I say to them, I'm proud of them. But this is where I say, I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of myself. Um, we publish, beloved.